Welcome to Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs, and today my guest is Gabriel Fain of Gabriel Fain Architects. Gabriel, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and talk about your practice and what you're trying to do with it. I have known Gabriel, coincidentally, since high school, and only when I started my job with Walden Homes did I come across Gabe and his practice, and I said, you know what, it's time. And so I really do appreciate you taking the time again, sit down with us and talk about your practice.
Thanks for having me. And it's great to be in your area, Leaside, where I've actually working on a project in Leaside that might transform this neighborhood, hopefully for the better.
Well, I think it's for the better, given the way that the city is in a desperate need of housing, and people generally struggle with that. I think that the woke people out there, they want housing that they can afford, right? And then all of a sudden they also don't want housing that they can afford because they're against. They go against these condo projects, but let's get there. And I do want, because I want to get there. Let's get there.
Yeah, we're getting right into it off the bat.
We're reaching
going right.
Okay, so getting into you and your practice, let's understand that a little bit. So the practice started in what year?
So I started my office in 2016. Having worked for a prominent architect in Toronto for a number of years. In fact, I started working there, KPMB, and since I was a student at the University of Toronto. So I started my practice in 2016 after moonlighting actually for a number of years at that office. And
aware of this?
No, completely unaware of what I was doing. Going to site visits at lunch. If they're listening to this, I'm sorry, but I would take meetings at different times of the day. I would work in the evenings. I actually was sitting next to an individual who covered for me a lot of the times, and I was going to visit sites during those. No names. Yeah, no names. I guess I gave away the office that I worked at, so they'll find out eventually. So I started in 2016, and the goal of the practice is and has always been to create an architecture that is unique to Toronto. Okay. I want, that's the kind of pursuit, that's the ambition of the practice. There's that kind of stated goal. And it really has to do with kind of thinking through my history and my work experience and trying to understand, what are we building and what has been built over the last 10 to 15 years in Toronto, especially since I've kind of started in the field of architecture. So that was the practice in 2016, and I can kind of go into more of the kind of conceptual thinking of the practice if you want, or we can continue with questions. But yeah, essentially what I experienced at the office that I was working at was essentially importing ideas from all over the world, which is great. We all kind of do that. We all look at magazines, but then it's like, how does that translate to the context of the city? And this is a huge challenge. And I don't know if I've been able to achieve it yet, but I think some of my projects and the projects that I'm working on are trying to strive for that kind of uniquely Toronto character. And that's the goal. So my first project actually was a house not too far from here on Manor Road in Davisville. And that was, I think, I go back to that project a lot because it kind of summarizes a lot of my thinking in that, first of all, the process to build that building was incredible because it was a hugely political process. And
the neighbor next door.
The neighbor next door, but not only that, it was the whole residents association. Oh. It was the councillor, Josh Matlow, who came out in full force against this project. Initially, it was supposed to be 5 houses because my client purchased the Glebe Manor Lawn Bowling Club, and we wanted to build 5 houses there. It ended up being 1 house, but the neighborhood was up in arms. And I think this foreshadows a lot of the kind of experiences that I'm going through to this day, which is at a whole other level, but similar, right?
Yeah.
Fighting politicians, fighting neighborhood associations, not necessarily fighting. I would say maybe it's more negotiating with them.
Yeah, or educating them in what they don't know so that they can actually make an informed decision, because most people are political heroes.
The educational part is difficult because I feel like architecture always takes a back seat in these conversations.
Right.
No one actually talks about what the building is. They just talk about the fact that there is a building and that it's going to cast shadows and that it's going to set a negative precedent. So this house was, the whole neighborhood up in arms. I actually went to a town hall. They had a town hall and I kind of sat at the back of the town hall. No one knew I was there. Hundreds of people, with like signs saying, yeah, like we don't want this house here. Anyways, but the house ended up being kind of interesting and evolved through this process. It kind of morphed into something that I think only could belong on that site.
Yeah.
So essentially for a first project, I was so naive, right? We carved out the ground floor of that project so that the second floor cantilever is 15 feet. And that was to get the neighbor on side to give her an unobstructed view of the park that the city was going to build next door.
I drive past the house specifically, instead of driving down Eglinton, I drive on Manor so that every time I drive along that section, I can look at the house and I can think about the neighbor.
It's an interesting project too, because what I was trying to do is really get the neighbor on board. And so even the brick, if you look at the brick, it's a very inexpensive brick from Brampton Brick.
Yeah, it matches.
But it matches her house exactly. Yeah. So it's trying to tie in. It actually has a hipped roof behind like a parapet wall. So it's kind of a contemporary design, masking a very traditional house in a way.
Right.
So it's this, and it's really riffing off the neighborhood feel in that sense, but doing it in a way that's contemporary.
I very rarely ever bring up addresses, and I don't want you to give the address away, mainly because for privacy purposes to a homeowner. But I'm sure through social media, we'll be able to show a picture of it, and anybody else can go ahead and drive along Manor, and you'll probably end up finding this house.
Yeah, you can't miss it. It's on the kind of entry to that street. So that was the first project, and that's kind of where things started off. And I don't know if you have further questions or if you want to take it. Or...
I'll take it from there. Yeah. So you started off with that first project. It was a residential project. Initially, it was supposed to be multi-res in some way, right? And were you working alone? Was it just you in the office?
Yes, it was just me. I was doing everything, and I still do most of the drawing in my office, even for the large scale projects that I'm working on right now. I'm doing most of the drawing, most of the detailing. In fact, I have collaborators now, obviously, about 4 or 5 people that help me. And, but at the start, it was just me kind of working candlelit, evenings, weekends, mornings. Whenever I could. Yeah. And the office kind of evolved from that. And 2016 was actually a great time to start an office because the market was good.
Yeah.
There was a lot of interest. Interest rates were good. So people could kind of do good stuff. And I was doing mostly houses, additions, renovations. And then things kind of started changing. And towards 2018, it was this idea of trying to really pursue this idea of city building. And I started off really thinking about laneway housing at that time.
Right, because that was shortly thereafter the approval for laneway housing in City of Toronto.
Yeah, in 2018, the bylaws changed. And I think we had some influence over some of those changes. There are obviously other groups that were involved more specifically about changing those policies. But I think our project on McKay was instrumental in kind of, I think, upping the game in terms of the laneway discussion. And it took us a long time to get that project approved. And that also had incredible neighborhood opposition. Before 2018, we were trying to get that approved. Huge neighborhood opposition, again, political opposition. So there's a kind of trend, there's a thread that goes through a lot of the projects of people up in arms.
As you describe the thread, I'm literally thinking of the person that's sitting at a sewing machine and how you're spooling the 2 different parts of the needle that go up and down, and how literally your project is in the center. And there's the opposition in one color, and there's the people that are for it in the other, and they are just intersecting nonstop.
Yeah. My client, who is actually also incredible designer and an amazing developer, Brandon Donnelly. So he actually did this like study of all the neighbors that opposed, and it was literally like arrows on every single house in the neighborhood. And they also came to, before we actually got this building approved as of right, we went to committee of adjustment.
Yep.
And huge showing of the community there against it. And even the planning department didn't understand what we were trying to do. It was still relatively a new concept.
Right.
And even now it's still, there's not a lot of laneway houses in the city. There's only like 150.
Well, the concept was, that they thought that there was going to be this massive explosion of construction, and what no one really realizes that there's still a lot of costs associated with doing this. Right?
Huge costs,
Yeah.
huge costs and complexity of servicing and connection to the main house.
Yeah.
They're incredibly difficult.
Water connections and
Yeah.
drains.
Yeah.
And then you need to have that proximity to a fire hydrant close by.
And Toronto laneways aren't the easiest place to build. On McKay, we had a 100-year-old tree that the neighbor did not want to remove.
Right.
So we lifted the whole building on helical piers. The whole building is floating above the ground. So you could have like raccoons living under this laneway house. But that's the nature. That's the nature of laneway houses in Toronto. They're just rough. I think they're kind of like this rough urbanism. And our ambition was to create like rental housing.
Right.
And it's to try to start to address, as 2018, 2019, there's starting to emerge this idea of this kind of housing crisis, this affordability crisis. And I think the practice kind of evolved to try to really address some of these key issues that are so prominent in our city right now.
And was that where you wanted to take the practice when you started it, or this was a natural evolution of the practice?
My ambition has always been to do large scale urban and city building projects. So it's kind of the natural evolution of where to take the office. And then, so that was under construction, in fact, and then COVID hit. And through that project and through COVID, my office expanded exponentially. Like it didn't go just from like a 3,000 square foot house to a 4,000 square foot house. It went from a 2,000 square foot house to a 350,000 square foot condos and 30,000 square foot buildings and 150 units, 300 units. Like through COVID, there was this just explosion of projects and the scale kind of increased. And that's kind of where my practice is now. So it evolved in that kind of trajectory.
And how did it get there? Was this a response to RFPs that were out there in the city and with developers, or were you somehow connected to some of this? Like, what did that look like?
One particular developer who's actually quite involved in Leaside right now saw the Laneway House project.
Yep.
And he asked me to look at a few sites that he had. And I'd spoken with him before. His name's Bill Gardner, incredible developer. I mean, one of the most visionary young developers in the city. There's kind of this new like emergence of developers that I think are going to transform the city. And so he asked me to look at a site, which was 1650 DuPont, which was grain lofts. And that kind of led to other projects. So it was just a natural kind of word of mouth. There was no zero marketing. There's barely any web presence. There's zero to no Instagram presence, like very little in terms of outreach, but it's more just, I think the buildings and the projects communicate a certain idea that I think are resonating with, developers. And through that, then other developers saw that project. And then that's led to other work specifically in the Junction. So I have another project in the Junction close by. And so it just one thing kind of leads to another. And the scale of the projects means that there's a lot of public interest in what's happening. And now
this because of the notifications that people are made aware of when there's going to be a hearing.
Well, yeah, the consultation project for a larger scale building is significant. right?
Yeah.
The public is involved throughout the whole process.
Yeah.
So they have a huge say in what happens. And then the politicians kind of get involved, and the stakes are much higher. And I like working where the stakes are really high, where, these are projects that I think will define what the city is for the next 20 to 30 years. We're going to look back and say, what were you guys building back then? And why were you building that? And so like, I'm against, for example, all these kind of pyramid shaped buildings, and a lot of my projects are trying to avoid that. And I think the city is finally catching up to how we should be building these kind of mid-rise rental and condo buildings. A lot of developers are actually shifting to rental to try to deal with some of the kind of issues that we're facing today. So there's a lot of things to unpack from just that.
Yeah, well,
that idea.
I mean, the concept, for those unaware, I mean, Toronto is one of the largest metropolises in North America. This is where we're based. And there is a substantial influx of people moving to Toronto from outside of Canada. And that creates a substantial housing crisis, which is one of the reasons why in 2018 they created the laneway houses. Then shortly thereafter, they allowed for laneway suites to be built, and that helps address it in some way, but the cost of that is really high. So when you start looking at these larger scale projects and you look at rental, that is how you start to make housing more affordable. Why I started when you brought up some of these projects at the beginning was talking about the neighborhoods and how everyone comes together and they rally against this, yet the people that are involved in it are the people that can't afford to have either themselves or their family move anywhere else in the city, because either they've got rent control where they live, or they bought a long time ago and they bought their house for $150,000 that's now worth like $2 million, and it's a tear down, right?
Correct.
So
yeah.
So
they're the gatekeepers
exactly
of these neighborhoods,
and they're literally making the market
unaffordable.
Thank you. That is the word.
Yeah, because and our fights are often 33 stories is too high in Leaside, or 34 stories is too high in Leaside, but we're going to fight you for a year, and 31 stories is acceptable. So now you just lost, maybe 30 units, 30 units that could be condo, could be rental. We don't know. In this market, it's so unpredictable what developers are going to do. There's going to be a huge kind of push now to actually build a lot of the things that people are kind of drafting now. In a way, there's a bit of a lull in the market right now. And so it's going to be interesting when the planning regime kind of catches up to what architects, I think, are pushing for, which is a more kind of sustainable way of building. Then, so they fight us for, come down 2 floors, and that ends up removing a significant amount of units from these buildings. And it really, what is the end game? Like, what does that really do? And so we're always pushing to kind of straighten out these buildings, kind of create more efficient buildings. And we're also looking at different ways of construction, like the old ways of building concrete building. We're going to have to slowly get away from that and start building these mid-rise and even taller buildings out of mass timber. So there's going to be an interesting push in the next couple of years as some of these buildings are built, to see what is this kind of city that we're going to see.
Why do you think you need to go towards mass timber and not concrete?
There's a number of reasons. First, I think aesthetically, from the interior, it's beautiful, to live in a wood building. Second, it's actually much quicker to build a mass timber building than it is to build a concrete building. When we were first looking at grain, the suppliers who we were working with, who, by the way, were harvesting the wood locally, like in Ontario. So that's another interesting kind of fact, is this idea that we're building buildings with local and locally sourced materials. We're not, or at least that's the goal, right? So you can build quicker. It's beautiful, and it's more obviously sustainable. The carbon footprint of a wood building is far less than a concrete building. So we have to push towards that. And also that means that we have to build in a certain way. We can't have all these kind of angular planes. We can't have all these terraces. And that's kind of resulting in the type of buildings that my office is producing, which are a lot more kind of rational in terms of their overall massing. And that might be why there's so much kind of neighborhood pushback in a lot of these projects. I mean, a project that I wanted to talk about was the one that in fact is going to city council tomorrow. And it's in the annex. It's on Lowther. It's right in the heart of the annex.
What's so interesting about this right now is that by the time this episode airs, there will have been a decision.
A decision. Yeah, that's true.
What's the decision?
Who knows? I actually don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But this is a hugely political project. Obviously an important area of the city, but it's a
main intersection being
Bloor and Spadina. You can't get any more central to that. And what's interesting about this project, so Alex Bezikovich wrote an article in the Globe and Mail a few days ago that I think really captures what my kind of vision is for the city. And I think where the city needs to go. And it's really to start incorporating these mid-rise buildings into neighborhoods, our protected neighborhoods that we were talking about earlier. So this building is in fact in a residential zone. So what they call the yellow belt. If you look at a zoning map of the city, all the yellow is the areas where you can't build apartment buildings. So this project would be one of the first to kind of insert an 11-story building into a neighborhood. And that is shocking to a lot of people, especially in this area of the city. And when you look at the building, in terms of the massing, it's a very kind of simple massing. But the expression of it, I think, is kind of what I was saying before, is what was my practice all about, is really uniquely a Toronto building. So the base of the building is essentially a riff on the kind of Edwardian and Victorian styles that you see throughout the annex. And I went deep into archives. I was looking at architects like E.J. Lennox. I don't know if you know some of these guys, Edvin Burke. Like these guys were prominent architects back in the day, back when, the annex was first being built. So I was studying their work, looking at their drawings and understanding, how do we shape the windows and the brick articulation, and how do we bring that into a contemporary world? And then the upper portion of the building is riffing off of the apartment buildings in the annex, which were primarily designed by an architect named Uno Pre. I don't know if you know him.
I do not.
But he did these like space age looking buildings with these incredible concrete fins that project into the sky. I think they're optimistic buildings. They're exciting buildings. They're iconic buildings. And so the upper portion of this building in the annex kind of takes on that form and that expression, but it's done in a way that the fins that I've incorporated are actually used to structure the balconies, and they're thermally broken balconies. So it's this idea of like taking the Toronto, the essence of this neighborhood, and how do we bring it into a way that's contemporary, that's meaningful, that's thoughtful. And that's like how we should be building with punched windows. There's no window wall here. I think the project is like a expression of my philosophy of how we should be building in the city. And so there's never a discussion about architecture in any of the kind of political debate.
So tomorrow, are you involved in any of this tomorrow?
Completely out of my hands. We've done everything we can. We've canvassed the neighborhood. We've spoken to everyone. Right. We've tried to negotiate. We've done everything we could. Planning staff love the project, 100% support the project, but it's up to the politicians and the neighbors and their influence over those politicians to see what happens. So, and there's many projects like this, but I think this, in terms of the location what it means in terms of planning regime, I think is the most important thing that I'm doing right now.
I mean, it's interesting as you say that because, and I am terrible right now for not being able to remember who designed it, but there's a set of buildings at the corner from where I live that are done in the same style of what you're describing. Now, not necessarily from the projection to the top as you're describing, but in terms of the massing at the ground level when you're driving along Eglinton, all of the brick and stone matches the area. And the massing for, I think it's floors 3 and 4 and up, recede back from the street so that they're not a hindrance and they don't feel overwhelming to the street. And it's very similar to what you're describing to be something that very much speaks to the neighborhood in the best way possible that you can. And yet, again, like, the area you're talking about, it's such a highly dense area. There's quadplexes all over.
Super dense. Yeah. University of Toronto is right there. Yeah, like we should be building these kinds of buildings.
These buildings need to be there. They have to. What you can understand, not cannot, but can understand, is that a person that lives on that street is now potentially going to have shadow over their house. That is why the majority of neighborhoods are against this. Ultimately, that's it. Their grass will die.
Yeah, right? I walk on the shadow side of the street a lot of the times. And I think the shadow is the only metric they have to go against.
That's it.
The height. And really, you don't perceive the height. Once these buildings are built, you really only perceive the ground floor, the second, third, maybe fourth floor. But really, it's that ground floor. That's the most important. And I think when you look back at the last 10 to 15 years of mid-rise and tall building construction in the city, I think generally we've failed. I'm sorry to say that. All glass, all kind of curtain wall on the ground floor. Yep. And then they get taken up by, I have nothing against like shoppers but they plaster these images in front of the curtain. So why do you put glass if they're just going to put a picture in front of it? Yeah. And I think we've failed. And I think it's up to my generation, our generation, to fix all these issues that we've seen. A lot of what I'm trying to do is a reaction to all the things that I'm trying to unlearn. Window walls, glass balconies, all glass buildings. We need to get away from that. And I'm trying at every project to do that.
Well, and it seems like you're also thinking largely about sustainable architecture. Like you're talking about thermal breaks with that detail. That is highly efficient for the people that are going to live in there. And you talk about, how your skin reacts when you have an HVAC system running in the winter in Toronto and how dry your skin gets. And if you're an inhabitant of that building like that, where there's actually been some thought as to how it's going to perform, well, like it might actually be really nice to live in that building. Right?
What about walls to put a picture? Yeah. Why do I want all glass in front of me?
Or the entire wall is made out of concrete, and how are you going to go hang a picture? You're going to go buy a concrete a drill and and a bit, and you got to there's so much work that has to go into that.
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like what you're doing is what needs to be done. And again, I think that the challenge you're being met with is as a result of people not getting sun. That's it.
It's that. Yeah, pretty much. And also like wood buildings, like we're trying to push the limits of also how you build within those materials, which, it's a whole other, I think you're more involved in the construction aspect, and maybe for your viewers, it's interesting, but we're for a wood building, you pretty much have to cover all the wood.
Yeah.
Right. And so we are working with, specialized code consultants to try to expose all the wood possible through what's called alternative building code solutions. So you really there's so many factors. There's the political, there's the neighborhoods, but there's also how we're building.
Yeah.
And I think that has to change and is changing. And I think you really need to push in every project a little bit, that dial. So for Grain, the first version of it, Yeah. Pretty much every wall and floor was an alternative building solution. So we were exposing the walls, the demising walls of the units were wood, the ceilings, all wood. And it's just, you have to kind of push. And that's another, I think, focus of the office, starting from your first question, is really just pushing and experimenting and being radical as much as possible. Not radical doing crazy forms, but radical in the thinking.
Yeah. See, to me, Japanese architecture is like just such a great foundation for all of this. And you talk about working both with concrete, but also with mass timber. You know, the way that they notch everything. You know, you're talking like hundreds of years old construction, holding together, no problem, mass timber, but also designed in a way, and from an engineering standpoint, to be able to sustain. They have earthquakes.
No,
right?
you're absolutely
tectonic
right.
plates, like
Yeah.
They are so far ahead with that stuff. But that we're not here to talk about.
No glue, no nails. Yeah. I actually did a bench on King Street. I don't know if you've ever drive by or walk by, that uses some of these principles of Japanese kind of wood construction. It was a competition for a public bench. It's called the King Street Parklet competition. It's still there. I was supposed to actually take it down 3 years ago, but if you go there, it's right in front of.
And why? Sorry, you say you're supposed to take it down 3 years ago. It's still there.
It's still there. It was supposed to be a temporary bench,
but they've allowed it to stay, or
it just stayed under the radar.
Yeah,
but
fair.
Sometimes we go to the Roy Thompson Hall, listen to a performance, and then I take my friends or family and we're like, let's go sit on this bench and like have a smoke or something. No, it's but it uses this Japanese idea of the interlocking. If you go and check it out, it's not anything precious. It's the cheapest thing you've ever seen. It was reclaimed wood.
But the construction of it, the thought that goes into it is what's precious.
Exactly. It's all these joints. There's like a few screws and nails, but it's all just held together, friction fit. So even a small project like that, I'm trying to do things there.
Yeah. I mean, and to have the concept of having something like that removed doesn't make any sense.
Well, now that King Street doesn't have too many cars, it's mostly street cars and cyclists. Yeah. And I see people sitting there. Like I go by and they're sitting there. Their Uber drivers are like, that's their main hangout spot.
It's got a few coffee stains.
Yeah, they like sit there, wait for the food to come from whatever restaurant around there.
Okay, so I like that we've just unpacked a ton of information
on one question.
But that's the beauty of being organic. For anyone listening, so you know, I generally will come into these interviews. I will not have. There's nothing in front of me. Gabriel's not been given any material in advance to prepare for anything, so he has no idea where it's going to go. So in some ways, he's hoping that he can have a direct impact on conversation. In other ways, I'm hoping to be able to have my direct impact, and we meet at that middle ground. And that's part of what's so beautiful about this is that here we are, and we're talking about the housing crisis in Toronto and what you're trying to do to help improve that. And I am like, I know that you have that other project over here in Leaside, right? And the community has rallied against that a few times, I think. Right?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's hopefully going to get built, and we're going to start working on construction drawings and permit drawings. And at the end of the day, it's going to be part of the community, and it's going to be part of a larger growth pattern next to major transit infrastructure along the Eglinton LRT. If we're not building on transit, where are we supposed to build? So I think that I would call it a tower, and there's going to be a few more on Bayview, and let's just be ready for that. And let's try to make them great pieces of architecture. What's really interesting through that process is being in the same room and meeting guys like Peter Clues from AA, who's like the father of the new condo, building in Toronto. Like he's the, pioneer of a lot of what we're seeing in the city, and just seeing and being in those conversations, because he's doing a tower just next to my project. But also in that project is really all about this idea of material and the sense of touch, and like, can we use brick for the podium? Can we riff off some of the other materials that we're seeing in the area? And that's, it's an important building, I think, because how many units are going to be there and what it's going to do to that stretch of Bayview. We need people. We need dense, walkable neighborhoods. And if we don't have those kinds of buildings in those neighborhoods, then we're not creating great neighborhoods.
I agree. Look, there's an entire city being built at the corner of Edmonton and Don Mills right now.
Right.
Literally.
Right.
I don't know the number, but I believe the number is something in the ballpark of like 30,000 units or something like that.
Yeah.
But you're in an area where you're talking about right now in Leaside and in Don Mills, where you have a park, you have superstores for groceries. To not take advantage of this is foolish, especially in the city that we're in, where the future plans of light rail development and subway development are happening now. And it's with the idea that they're going to somehow make this whole thing work, and that we need to retain talent in the city. I mean, I know that's not necessarily an architecture question, but like, there's a lot, you got 8 million people in the city and they're offering jobs to them anywhere. They can leave. You need places for people to stay to retain the talent of the community. And like that, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that has nothing to do with your practice.
No, but that's important, because like, who's moving to a lot of these places? People who can maybe afford to, like, everyone's saying high-end condos. Like, these condos are way more affordable than a lot of the houses around the area, especially like Leaside, or even in the annex. Like, if that's a rental project, that's going to be very much affordable to live in the best neighborhoods in the city. Yeah. And you need that density to make it affordable. Right. You need that height. So let's make it amazing. Let's get the best architects. You know, I don't know if I am, but like, let's get other international architects. Yeah. Let's make these neighborhoods like really livable.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's a question I'll take you to, and that is, back when we knew each other and we were in high school, did you know that you wanted to do this? Did you know that this was a path that you were going to want to go on, or was there another idea in your mind back then? I know that I just jumped, literally, I just walked us.
Yeah, no, it's in, I knew you were going to go to high school, and that was
take it before high school.
High school.
Go to elementary school. Were you doodling?
Oh, 100%. Drawing all the time. I wanted to be an animator, actually, and I was doing a lot with that. But high school was really important because it was the people that I met in high school that were instrumental in introducing me to kind of really different thinking and philosophers and music. And we were in a group that was really, I don't know, kind of different than your typical maybe high school, like go hang out at the corner store or whatever, the mall. Like we were like reading, we were playing music, we were doing all sorts of that stuff. And I
don't think that's atypical of high school.
Okay.
There's different groups of people in high school, and you were part of a different group of people.
Yeah. I mean, I was still like playing sports. Don't get me wrong, but we were also like really into a lot of thinking. And one of the writers that we were introduced to was Ayn Rand, who wrote The Fountainhead, which is this incredible book that's kind of loosely based on Frank Lloyd Wright's life. But anyways, this thinking kind of got me thinking about architecture more through high school. And then from then, that's when I really wanted to become an architect. But before that, it was mostly just like drawing a lot and thinking about that. But is through high school that I really wanted to become an architect.
And so where did you go to university?
I went to U of T.
Okay.
For undergrad and master's. And that was a good experience. I still go back. Like, I'm going tomorrow to guest review. I'm part of the kind of scene of the school to be involved in that. I don't teach necessarily. Okay. There's really no time. I don't know how other practitioners teach. But I like going and kind of being part of the discussions and the debates at the university. I think that's very important as an architect to do that. But school was it was my own schooling. I kind of just did my own thing. I was at the library most of the time, just reading about architects and studying an architect and getting inspired and then traveling going to places like Brazil and wanting to be a kind of Brazilian architect for a while.
Yeah, they make some
And
incredible
it's,
stuff.
yeah, amazing. I don't know if you've been, but
I've not been to Brazil. No,
but,
that it's on my list.
Brasilia is the capital. And that was like a hugely inspiring experience to see a city planned by an architect and executed and built in a way like similar to his vision. Not necessarily the most successful city from what it was, but the architecture and the kind of these objects within the city are remarkable. And just that kind of experience was really influential in my kind of foundation as an architect.
And what have you been to other places in the world that have stood out with your eye for architecture?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
I mean,
Where?
Through Europe and I actually love the United States in terms of architectural thinking. A lot of my favorite buildings are from the United States. Actually, two of my favorite architects, I think, created some of the most amazing buildings in the US. They're both named Louis, believe it or not. So
Ashbury?
Louis Sullivan is one of my favorite architects. He was Frank Lloyd Wright's mentor.
Okay.
And so he was considered the father of the skyscraper. And I'm actually looking at a lot of his projects even now because he created the most remarkable 12, 13-story buildings. Obviously, there were steel buildings at that time, which was revolutionary. But if you think about steel being revolutionary now, wood being revolutionary,
right,
there's a lot of parallels. So I always come back to Louis Sullivan, kind of this obscure figure. He's not like the main kind of guy that people say, oh, I love like Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
But he was Frank Lloyd Wright's teacher. And then there's Louis Kahn. I studied a lot of Louis Kahn's work. I don't know if you know.
I don't, but you've given me four names.
You must see Louis Kahn's work. He was based out of Philadelphia.
Okay.
And the most incredible pieces of architecture have been created by Louis Kahn. If you go to the Salk Institute, just outside of San Diego, that building put me to tears. Like, that is the most remarkable piece of architecture you can ever see in your life.
So I was going to ask you if you have a list of the, like, let's say top 2 buildings or pieces of architecture.
Yeah. Salk Institute is probably the top building that I've ever seen in my life. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. The space, the materials, the light, the composition, the circulation, the idea of Louis Kahn at that time, like he was like a master by that point. Like he was later, this is later in his career. And he had this idea of servant and serve space. So he really thought about like mechanical systems versus like the main spaces. This is like a lab for the Salk. He, I think, created an important vaccine. So much thinking, and then the execution on top of that. So you have the thinking and then building it to an absolute perfect level. And it withstands the test of time. Even today, you go there and you're like, this is maybe a perfect piece of architecture. I don't know if that exists, but in my mind, it is.
Look,
you have to go there.
The beauty of opinions is that everyone's got one, right?
Yeah.
And if your opinion is that this could be one of the most beautiful pieces of architecture that exist, well, then I think it's worth seeing.
It's definitely worth seeing. And he has others in the States, in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And you have to see it. But it's also his thinking about the city that I'm trying to emulate.
Right.
Like, he had this quote where a child should walk in, I'm kind of paraphrasing, walk through the city, and through that experience, realize what that child should be their whole life. Like, they should be inspired to become what they will become just through the city. And so not only was he just creating buildings, but he was thinking about the city, thinking about traffic, thinking about progressive and innovative ways to building taller buildings. when he had no work, he was just thinking about these incredible ideas that some of them didn't get built. But I think it's that thinking that what I'm trying to pursue in my own practice is, what is the city that we want to live in? And we should be creating a city that we want to live in, that we love. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times you walk around, you're like, what is this place? What is the city becoming? We need to, I think, have an influence on that. And it's going to take decades, maybe my entire life. It's still early days for a lot of these larger scale projects. But right. I think it's that thinking, hopefully, that will carry through the next several decades.
And you mentioned before that you had a staff. Are the staff of working with the same vision?
I think so. I think the staff are really talented. They're all architects.
Okay.
There's no like interns. They're all architects.
And you said how many? Was it 4 or 5?
Yeah, 4 or 5. Yeah. It kind of varies. Yeah. And I think so. I think there's always a discussion. There's always a discussion about what this project is and why we're doing it. It's not just, oh, let's just draw this building and it's cool. Right. Like, it's always trying to go back to that source, that root of why we're doing this. I think I'm fortunate now to kind of pick the projects that I want to do at the scale. It sounds crazy. I feel like I'm listening to like a famous architect. Oh, I get to pick the project, but it's true. Like, you
put in work and you go and you start researching the mentor of who other people are in some ways feel influenced by. And I mean, look, you work hard at it.
And I'm getting calls.
No problem with owning that.
Yeah. And I'm getting calls from different people of all walks of life and all developers saying, like, take a look at this site and see what you can do with it. Like, I got a call and we were looking at a site in Kensington Market, right in the heart of Kensington Market. Ooh. Can you imagine a mid-rise in the middle of Kensington Market? Huge. I mean, that project, we'll see what happens. But it's kind of on it's like on, life support. It's like in the ICU. It's like barely surviving.
Yeah,
it's like,
that is literally the defibrillator.
If that even gets to if that gets off life support, I would be impressed with the planning process in Toronto. Because that, I think, would be even more politically charged than the Annex project.
100%.
But it's kind of frustrating because it's a parking lot site. It's actually next to one of my favorite bars in the city. I won't say it, which was actually a bar that we used to go to back in high school, and we used to drink there underage.
No, you didn't.
Sorry. We used to scratch out the 4 in our driver's license to be 3 years older than we are. And we used to go to that bar, and then 20 years later to now have the opportunity to work or try to do a project in that neighborhood is kind of interesting.
So in the same way, I will say that we're looking at a project, but prospectively now as well, in the area that I'd grown up in. Like literally down the street from where I grew up playing tennis, and the prospect of even potentially having something to do with that in very, very much the same way is a very, very exciting feeling to be able to kind of see that circle of your life. It's actually not even, is it full circle? I don't know. Is it half circle? But there's a circle there.
There's a circle. Whether it's an arc or arch, or
but it's a very wholesome feeling to feel that. We've only got a few minutes left, and so there's a few other things I want to ask you really quick, and that is, we've talked a lot about the intent you have with your practice. I do like to ask everyone, because this is where everyone can feel in some ways connected, but I think also they feel connected based on all the things you're trying to do. Family, what does that look like for you?
I have a beautiful wife who is a prima ballerina with the National Ballet of Canada.
Incredible.
She's incredible. She just came back from guesting in Houston, and she was performing Romeo and Juliet, which is her the role she's most known for.
Yeah.
She's incredible. An athlete, an artist. Yeah. It kind of all combined, that's what a ballerina is. And I've been immersed in the world of ballet for the last, number of years. So it's that she's incredible. And we have a young daughter. Her name's Juliet, which kind of works from my wife's Chelsea's role as Juliet, but spelt differently. And that's our family. And
amazing.
Yeah, we're a very close family.
I didn't know you had a daughter, so there's something that I got to learn out of that little tidbit too. And I guess last thing,
I'd like her to be an architect too, or a ballerina.
Juliet,
one of the two.
Juliet, if you listen to this later in your life, you make your own choices. Just follow your passion. Last thing I'm going to ask you, if you could work in any city in the world, what city would that be to bestow your vision for architecture upon it?
That's a huge question to ask.
I know. I haven't asked anyone that question yet. Yeah.
The obvious answer is Toronto. This is my city. This is the city that I want to build. Obviously with many other people.
Yeah.
But for me, it's about this kind of regionalist approach to building and to architecture, is to really focus on your location that you know best. Obviously, I would have ambitions to create buildings internationally, but I think there's so much work in this city itself that, like, why would I want to build anywhere else? There's huge, endless possibilities in our own city. We're like a teenager here. We have yet to even realize where we're going as a city. So I think this is the city. And then obviously it would be amazing to do a tower in New York. I mean, that would be the ultimate like pinnacle of my objective, to create towers of meaning. And
imagine this podcast goes long enough that we could then re-engage in a conversation after you finish or you win an RFP for that. That would be circular. Gabriel, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been so amazing to learn all about how your practice has evolved, very organically, but also very methodically, to be able to look at, changing the landscape of the city of Toronto and to hopefully make housing in the city far more affordable. It's an admirable cause, and it's a pleasure to learn more about that. So thank you.
Thank you. I believe architects have a huge role in society to create meaning and to make beautiful cities. So thanks for having me. It's a real honor.